Good morning, everyone. Today we are here to discuss social stratification. So, what do we mean by social stratification? Stratification means any division of, in this context, of people. Now, how are we dividing these peoples? On what basis can human beings be divided? It can be based on your likes and dislikes, etc. But in the context of a society, right, it can be based upon your caste, your gender, or even your profession. There are a lot of factors that cause a stratification in the society. So, the stratification of the society leads to an inherent social inequality. Now, how do I reach this conclusion? So, see, if a society is being divided, right, then some groups might be given preference based on the culture, based on the government, based on the social norms, etc. So, in that case, an inequality will arise. If some people are getting, say, the first prize, then some people will automatically be given the second prize, right? So, now what causes these inequalities? It can be based on your income, right? If if for example a person A is getting 10 lakh rupees a year and a person B is getting 10,000, then the social standing of person A will be greater in our society. The second can be education, right? Now, this inequality manifests itself, comes across in terms of educational and professional opportunities. What that means is, if some parts of the society, some people in some specific group will have access to better education facilities, they'll be getting better opportunities. They might have better access to costlier education, better schools, etc. Right? Similarly, health facilities. So, if a person is able to afford a better hospital which charges higher fees, is in their neighborhood only, etc., right? If I'm living in the city, I'll have access to better healthcare because I'll have so many hospitals around me. But if I'll be in a village, will I get the same type of hospitals? No, right? And similarly, political representation and participation. So, what that means is, if I'm from, say, community A, I might have lots of MLAs and MPs to represent me in the parliament. But say a community B might have just one MLA to talk for them, or just one MP to talk for their entire community. Now, if any discussion arises in the parliament, whom do you think? Which community will be able to exercise more power, be able to exercise more control of the acts, of the bills, etc., that might be passed in the parliament, right? So that is another form of inequality that is there in our society. Now that we know that there exists social inequality in our society and it is a major problem, the question arises is, how do we deal with it? One of the ways of dealing with it is through education. If each and every child in our country has access to free education that is widely available, then they'll be able to develop the same type of skill set, the same level of skill set across all the communities and across all the stratifications, right? So, once they've developed those skill sets, they'll have access to similar opportunities. So, now, but how do we get education to everyone? How do we take education to everyone? So, for that purpose, we have a framework that has been established by the Constitution. That has been done so that the government is, it is not left to the government's will or choice to handle education. It is needed for the government to focus on the education sector. We do that through, first of all, the preamble. In the preamble, we have something called the directive principles. Hopefully, all of you are aware of what the directive principles are. So, in the directive principles in Article 39, it is, and I'm quoting, that it is the duty of the state government to provide social justice and people welfare. So, what is the meaning of those two keywords? Social justice means the distribution of wealth, opportunities, etc., fairly amongst all the people. And people welfare means taking care of the general well being of the people that the state is governing over. Now, how do you ensure all that? Again, to ensure all that, education plays a major role. You cannot even try to follow this directive unless and until you focus on education. So, that is one. The second is the amendment to the Constitution itself. So, according to the 86th Amendment to the Constitution, Article 21A and Article 45 were introduced. Both 21A focuses on free and compulsory education for children between 6 to 14 years. It makes it a fundamental right. And Article 45 makes it compulsory to provide free education to all kids below the age of 14. Now, how did we arrive to these articles, right? So, there's a right to live, which is the Article 21, which is a fundamental right. So, you have the fundamental right to live. Now, you can interpret it in two ways. The first way to think about it is to take it for its word value. So, you are allowed to breathe. But that is obvious, right? If you're born, then you're allowed to breathe. So, the Supreme Court interprets it in a more holistic manner. So, holistic means takes a bigger view of it, has a wider, more general interpretation of it. So, the right to live encompasses, takes care of everything like your education, you should have enough wealth, you should not be dying of hunger, etc., right? Stuff like that. So, if any of you are not getting education and if you are below the age of 14, right? So, it is your fundamental right. You can move the court, you can ask the court, ki, hello, I'm not getting, my right is not being met, and the court will have to follow through with it, have to direct the government, ki, go look what is happening. Please act on it. So, this was in general. Now, this is in general for all the kids. Now, there are special provisions, special acts for minorities and scheduled caste and scheduled tribe kids. Those are there because these minorities in general are more backwards, right? They have even lesser access because of stratification in the society and years and years and years of suppression. So, for that purpose, we have Article 29, which is for the protection of cultural rights of minorities. So, in cultural rights, education is inherently included. Again, Article 30 is there, which provides for the establishment of minority educational institutions. What this means is that there will be special colleges or special schools only for a specific community, or they'll have more reservation seats reserved for a particular community, right? And then again, Article 46 is there, which states that it is the duty of the government to support the educational institutes of educational interests of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, which is very self-explanatory. Now, this is how education has been ensured theoretically. The implementation is obviously not 100% there. So, that is the education aspect of it. Till now, we've discussed social stratification in a form of lot of things, through income, through education, etc. But there is one key form of stratification that exists inherently, and that is gender. People are normally divided into genders, naturally, right? So, obviously, since there is a stratification, there will be an inequality. In our society, women often play a secondary role, right? They get lesser salary. There's inequality in terms of everything. That is because it's been set by the society as such, because of old gender roles. This is why this is why there's a gender inequality. This is why since our society is set up in a patriarchal manner, women have lesser access to education, food, and health facilities. And that is reflected in the lack of nutrition and food security that they suffer from. According to various studies, it was seen that the BMI, that is the body mass index of women in general, was lower, and the women in cities were even lower, because in cities the food security is even lesser than for the food security in rural areas for women. So that puts forward a very bleak picture in terms of gender inequality in India. Also, there are a lot of other facts which point towards the same, which points towards similar results and observations. For example, as we saw that in the parliament, only 20% women only have 20% representation, while being roughly 50% of the nation's population. Also, even in apart from the parliament also, women usually are paid less for the same amount of work as men doing the same job, and so forth. There's a wage gap also. So what are the features of social stratification in general? What are the features that it comes with? So initially, it's social in nature. That means it's based on social standing. So the society has decided some norms that it is going to judge human beings by, and based on that your standing is decided. It could be your as we saw, it could be through your gender, through your income, etc., etc. Then it's universal. It happens everywhere. As long as there are people, as long as there's a society, there will be some social expectations, social norms. So there will be a stratification. It's ancient. It's been happening since forever. Since people have existed, this has happened, because as I told in universal, as long as there are people, there will be a stratification, as long as there's a society per se. And it exists in different ways. It has existed in different ways in Rome. It has existed in different ways in India. In India, it has existed through the caste system. In Rome, it would have existed in a different way, and so forth, right? There will be monarchs. There will be a different sort of social structure in Rome. So the stratification will take a different form, but there will be a stratification regardless of that. There are also major forms of social stratification. There's the primitive form, which is the most basic form of social stratification. Then there was slavery, where, for example, black people or Negroes from Africa, supposedly, were enforced into bonded labor and were not paid, and were kept in horrible situation and worked to death, basically. Then there was estate system, wherein a poor person would work on the estate of a very, very rich person for very minimal amount of money and without any ownership of the land. Varna system was the primitive form of caste system. It was the more flexible, older version of caste system. And caste system, finally, where Varna system became rigid, and it started to be determined by your birth and not by your profession. So those are the major forms of social stratification. Now that we've understood social stratification and what exactly is the caste system, now we're going to look at one of the extremes that comes out of that entire structure. So, one of those is untouchability. What exactly is untouchability? What that implies is that a section of the society is basically treated in a very inhuman manner. They are in the lowest in the social strata, and they are set aside to do low level jobs that no one else wants to do, like cleaning the sewers, etc., right? And they're not allowed to have access to the facilities that everyone else uses. For example, they weren't allowed to use wells, the common wells, they weren't allowed to use temples, they weren't allowed to pursue education, they weren't allowed to learn the Vedas, Sanskrit, and so forth. Right? So they weren't even allowed the access to education to improve their social situation. So that was one of the major uh, con that came out of the caste system. It was banned by the British government through the Indian Government Act in 1935, and through which they classified all the untouchables and tribals as scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, as we know now, right? So, how did the caste system end up creating this the concept of untouchability? It was actually put forth in Manusmriti, where it said that if you come in contact with an untouchable person, if you touch any of those people, you have to purify yourself after that. The Vagra Pradap Smriti was even worse. It said that if you came within the distance of a cow's tail of an untouchable person, you needed to purify yourself, even if you were close to them in their proximity. And in areas like the Malabar, they weren't allowed to, even if they made footwear, they weren't allowed to wear the same footwear. They had to do all these filthy jobs and all. And they were even denied property and political participation. All these basic fundamental rights they weren't allowed to have. They weren't allowed to vote, they weren't allowed to have representatives, they weren't allowed to own property, they weren't allowed education. So basically, they weren't treated as human beings. Untouchability is obviously a menace to the society. So, how do we fight it? For that purpose, the government has, the constitution has multiple articles to ensure that we can do away with this. So, Article 17 makes untouchability a crime. So, through the Untouchability Crime Act of 1955. Similarly, the Civil Rights Protection Act of 1977 made some additional changes to the Act of 1955 by adding universal right to vote and participation in election for a right of the minority community. Again, it also provided reservation in education and employment, which is one of the most unique factors of our constitution, the most unique property. Most other constitutions of other countries do not have this particular clause of reservation. Again, Act of 1989 added additional, more specific responsibilities for the government to ensure that untouchability can be done away with. With this, we conclude the social stratification chapter of sociology. Now, I'm attaching a small mind map chart based summary of the chapter to give you an overview. You can pause it and look at it to see how all the topics are interrelated and to gain some clarity. And with that, I'm signing off. Have a nice day, everyone.